The average home-cooked meal is $4 per serving, but for some, that is just too much. Today, I'm going to share my best budget meal strategies to cut that figure down to just $1 per plate. We're going to do that by focusing on one main protein, a few basic ingredients, and 5 different meals that my entire family is still raving about today. Not only are we headed for a grocery run, but we will also prep, cook, and break down the budget at the end. So let's get started. Many of you already know that I am a big fan of buying in bulk to save money on groceries, but that isn't easy for everyone. So my mission today is to show you what I grabbed in a recent Walmart run and how anyone can make huge leaps forward with a few basic grocery budgeting tips and prep strategies. We're going to grab more than just the basic frugal foods and make sure that we don't skip on flavor for the sake of budget, all while buying sizes that offer us the very best unit price. While we won't use a full bag of mixed vegetables this week, having them on hand for the future will help with the budget in weeks going forward. So grabbing that big bag to secure the best price is exactly what we need to do. Now, the biggest place I've found to save this week was on the chicken that I'm using as our main protein. I was able to save 38% on the chicken alone by skipping the raw chicken altogether and grabbing 2 rotisserie chickens for a total of $10.30. While I only needed a few extra ingredients to fill out this week's menu, I did calculate the cost per meal for every single ingredient down to the exact amounts used, so I'll share more on those figures a little bit later. But now it's time to get to work. This week's meal prep is a 2-part process. The first step is to go ahead and get all of that chicken pulled off the bone. Now, I did go ahead and purchase 2 rotisserie chickens because I didn't want to run short. But spoiler alert to the end, we could have went with just one, cutting my budget even further down than I already did. The one thing I will say is that this chicken was so juicy and so delicious since it was cooked on the rotisserie that my family was also able to snack on it throughout the week and came in and pulled out a little bit during this process right at the beginning, which I was a little bit nervous about because I wanted to make sure to have enough ready to do whatever needed to be done throughout the week. So once I got all of the chicken off of the bones, I bagged up the bones. Make sure to not get rid of the bones. You want to go ahead and use those to make a chicken stack for chicken noodle soup, which we'll be making throughout the week, or chicken pot pie, which would be a great option. Even if you don't have any plans that need a soup base or stock, don't get rid of those bones because bones from rotisserie chickens make absolutely amazing stock, and you can use it in the future if you don't use it right now. Even if you're in a canner, you can put it in the freezer. So make sure to hold on to those bones, even if you just freeze them and pull them out in a month or two going forward, you still have that option. Now, stock is exactly what I'm making here, which is day 2, step 2 of our meal prep process. This is so easy, and if you've never made your own chicken stock before, definitely notice exactly how simple this was. I used a recipe from natasha'skitchen.com. I'll make sure to link it down below, but it was so easy to just throw all of these bones in the Instapot with a few basic ingredients and then cover them with water. Now, her recipe says that it takes about an hour or 2 to actually make in the Instapot, but my Instapot said stock took about 30 minutes. So I went with that time, got it filled up to the max water level, submerging the bones with all ingredients in. And then once the processing time was finished, I let it natural release because I was actually busy planting my garlic for next year outside. I'm so excited for that, but that's another story. But once the stock was finished and my natural release complete, I strained it out and then put it back into the Instapot liner and straight into the fridge so I could have it as needed throughout the week. Now, just a note, if you are not new to my channel, you'll already know this, but all of the recipes I'm going to talk about today are going to be down in the description with the exception of the one I'm making right now. It's just so simple. I really just threw it together. There's no real recipe here, but what I am making is a fried rice. This comes together so quickly, and I actually love to make it with leftover rice or meal prepped rice, which is another great hack to save time in the middle of a busy week. So I threw some bacon grease into the pan. I always save that back. It is a cheap and very flavorful way to cook up your food. So bacon grease, some onions, the frozen vegetable bag that you saw us pick up earlier, and 3 eggs are into the middle here. You can do more or less eggs just depending on your need. And to that, I added 3 cups of dried rice. Now, in my initial planning stages for this week, I had a couple different recipes in mind, so I saved my chicken stock and did not put it in the rice as a base. Most typically, I will do that to add a little bit of extra flavor and nutrition to the rice when I'm cooking it, but for this specific challenge, I did not because I have plans in the future for that stock. If you do have extra stock at home, make sure to use stock when you can to make things like rice to add that extra nutrition, but it really won't make that big of a difference in the overall flavor. So water is fine if that's what you have. Once I got everything scrambled up, butter is the secret. I don't know if you've ever gone to Hibachi grills, but at the end, they always throw on some butter and melt it all together. And for a few years when I was making fried rice at home, I couldn't figure out what was missing until we took another trip back and I got to see exactly that little finish at the end and what I needed to do. Now, not only is fried rice an absolute hit, but I had enough leftovers to last several days throughout the week, which is always a big win for me. We used it for lunch several times. Now, after we were done with our plates, we took all of our scraps over and we scrape them into our Vigo countertop composter. We actually just add to it all week after every single meal. And in a matter of hours, this thing takes all of our kitchen waste and turns it into a nourishing compost that takes everything from garden to table and back again. Not only are we tackling our food waste in such a green way, but we're also able to do this without attracting bugs or adding any stink or nastiness to the kitchen at all, which was a huge concern for me when I was looking at ways to tackle compost on the countertop in the past. Now, last time I updated you guys on my composter, I was amazed at how many of you decided to jump in and buy one of your own. So I want to show you exactly what I've been doing with my compost at the same time. I'm taking it and putting it into some potting soil as I'm repotting a very neglected peace lily that was in the back corner of my kiddo's playroom. This thing used to be so lush and beautiful, and it deserves to be treated that way again. So after 5 years in the same pot, it's time to upgrade, and I am moving it to a self-watering planter from Vigo. This large planter is actually designed for tomatoes. It comes with a trellis and wheels to be able to easily move it around. But most importantly for me is it has an absolute huge reservoir for water, as well as an indicator to let you know exactly when it needs to be refilled. Now that is going to be priceless and hopefully will revive these plants that I've been neglecting for quite some time. If you are looking for ways to handle your food waste or upgrade your pots, make sure to check out my link in the description below where you can save $10 off the composter or take advantage of some amazing Black Friday sales going on now. So thanks again to the folks at Vigo for sponsoring today's content, and let's jump back in the kitchen. The next recipe that I want to share with you is so fast and so delicious that it is really quite unbelievable. My kids all love this. It was a very, very fast hit. So if you have leftover rotisserie chicken, make sure to not sleep on the garlic and herb pasta. It'll take you about the amount of time it takes to complete getting your water warmed up and your pasta cooked to get this entire meal put together. The first thing you need to tackle once you get the water going over on the stove is to get 2 cups of the rotisserie chicken diced up and ready to go. Now, if I had been thinking about the entirety of my week, I would have done more than just pull that chicken off the bone the first night. I could have chopped all of this up and had it ready to go. So just do the amount of prep that works best for you, but will save you more time during the week if you have it already chunked up in those bite-sized pieces. And if I were to do this exact same setup again, I would definitely do that night one and save myself the time moving forward. With that said, after your chicken is complete, you are going to need 4 tablespoons of butter. I did cut mine just so it melts a little faster, and also 4 cloves of minced garlic. Now, of course, garlic is something you can buy already pre-minced. That is totally your choice. I think the fresh garlic is a little bit cheaper, but if you buy that prepackaged garlic and you're able to keep it in your refrigerator for a longer time, if you don't cook that often or you don't use that much garlic, it might be a better choice for you in the end. To the butter and garlic, we're adding a 1/2 cup of olive oil plus some Italian seasoning, red pepper flakes to your taste or flavoring or whatever works for your family. And that's about it. We're going to get it melting over on the stove. And then to rewarm the chicken, once the pasta is almost done, about a minute before it's done, you just throw it in the boiling water with the with the pasta, and then move it straight over to the sauce that you've already created on the stove. After a quick toss to make sure everything gets completely incorporated, then you just top it with Parmesan cheese to your liking. The recipe calls for a 1/4 cup, but you can use more or less, of course, just depending on your need. And I'm also topping it with some dehydrated parsley. Now the recipe calls for fresh, but that is not something that I decided to pick up this week. I have the dehydrated at home and there's really no harm in using it. You just need a little bit more than you would need if it was fresh, but my family isn't really too crazy about it. For me, it was more for color and just a tiny bit of flavor. Now, most typically, I make a meal plan and I stick to it. My third meal was going to be chicken pot pie, but a couple weeks ago here at our house, which you'll be seeing next week, I made a turkey pot pie with our leftover turkey from the Thanksgiving dinner that we've already had here at home. I didn't want to show you that 2 weeks in a row, so I called an audible and looked online and fell in love with this recipe for a French onion chicken casserole. It's basically French onion soup and all of the bread and flavorings that come along with it in a casserole with chicken added in. So to make that complete and to make my dreams come true, I had to whip up some French baguettes. Now, have I ever done this before? No. So give me a little bit of grace on this one. But I wanted to try it out and just prove to myself that anything I set my mind to, I could at least attempt, even if not perfect, on the first try. So the dough is super simple. It's yeast, water, salt, and flour, plus a little bit of oil. I do recommend measuring. Most generally, when I'm making breads, I am super precise, but on this one, it just needed 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and I thought I could handle that without the measure. Definitely should have done that. But once I got it all added together, the recipe said just to cover it with a wet tea towel and let it rest until it was at least doubled in size. So in the meantime, I took my little lady that was behind me there upstairs and got her resting for her nap. And my other helpers came in when it was time to roll out the dough. They're always good about showing up anytime there is dough of any sort out. So you'll see some little fingers here and there trying to help me out with the flour. Now, once my baguette dough was put together and rolled up, I moved it over to some pizza pans, or what I use for pizza pans. They're actually just stone baking pans to do some proofing. Now, this is not a pan that I would recommend for this specific purpose, but I don't typically make baguettes, as I mentioned before, so it worked out. I could have made them longer and they would have been more beautiful on a different pan. But the truth is, I don't let something like that hold me back. And I don't think you should either. Give it a shot and see if it's something that you want to invest in or you want to buy different tools for down the road. But give yourself the chance with what you have, and I think you'll be amazed with what you can come up with. Now, as for the main ingredients of the actual casserole, as you can guess, it is absolutely onions. The recipe calls for 5 medium size, but mine were pretty large, so I went with 4, and very thinly sliced. Once you get all the onions cut up, you want to go ahead and put them in a skillet with some butter and get them browned and caramelized. This does take a while, and I should have used a different pan from the beginning because the more onion that you have touching the surface area of your skillet, the faster it's going to go. So I did end up moving these over to my huge Lodge cast iron, which I used earlier for the fried rice. It has so much surface area and it's able to get so hot that it really moved the process along rather fast as soon as I finally decided that skillet was not going to cut it. So just to save you some time, either A, meal prep these on the weekend to save that time altogether, or B, use a larger dish to begin with so you're not waiting on those onions as the main part because the rest of it is super fast. So while I have that going on in the back, I went ahead and cut up our chicken. I also had some brie cheese left in the refrigerator. The recipe does not call for brie, it calls for Gruyere. But that just isn't something that we keep. Again, feel free to improvise. Whatever you have in your kitchen will work. If you don't have mozzarella, you can use cheddar. Will it change the flavors just slightly? Yeah, perhaps, but it's still going to be really, really good. So once those onions get really nice and caramelized, you just add a couple tablespoons of flour and get it nice and mixed around in there so that you have a really good thick base when you go to bring your liquid together. What you don't want is for this to end up super runny, so using that really helps. Now this is beef stock. This is not something that I made up to begin with, but it is something that I already had from steak bones that I'd saved in the past. While the beef stock didn't personally add to my overall budget at this point, I did make sure to go back and price it as if I had purchased it at the store. So that total is added into my overall cost, which I'll share more with you at the end. So to put this casserole together, you want to go a couple big ladles full in the bottom of a 9x13 casserole and then start layering in your baguette slices. Now, I don't know if you noticed or not, but my baguette slices did not turn out very beautiful. It didn't rise very well. My kitchen was super cold on this specific day. I also didn't give it as long as it really would have needed. So lots of things went wrong, but it still tasted so good. And my kids were actually thrilled with it, asking if I would make it again. So I cut up one to go in the bottom of this casserole and had every intention to make the second one into croutons for a recipe that I was going to have in the next day or two. But it didn't last because the kids went crazy for it and they really, really enjoyed it. So again, just a little note, you don't have to hit it out of the park for everybody to think it's good. It doesn't have to be picture worthy. It just has to taste good. So once I layered in the cheese and the onion mixture as well as the baguettes, I just repeated that until all of the mixture was gone. So there are a couple places in there where the bread is a couple layers thick, and that really just adds to the increased goodness when it comes out. After you bake this for about 10 minutes, then you want to go back, take your lid off if you're using foil or whatever, and let it bake for the last few minutes with the top off until it looks bubbly and golden. At that point, you know it's ready to go. Now, I will tell you, this is one recipe that my husband thought was just so dang good and actually suggested that I take it to our next church potluck. So if you are in church with me, you might see this in the future. I know it doesn't look necessarily that beautiful, but oh my goodness, all the flavors are here. It is so, so good and really rich in flavor when you're adding in the onions, the mushrooms, and the beef stock. So highly recommend this if you're looking for a good one to travel to the family gatherings you might have coming up or just some adventures you have going on with friends or at church. This next recipe might be one of the absolute easiest things I have ever done and an amazing way to use up any protein leftover you ever have around. It might also be the number one reason somebody that doesn't bake bread might want to keep around sourdough starter. So what I'm doing here is making a sourdough pizza crust simply by using my discard. Now, I've heard a lot of people say over time that they don't want to keep a sourdough starter because you waste so much. There's absolutely no waste with the sourdough starter. This is the discard. I store it in my refrigerator and then use it anytime I need something like a pizza crust or a variety of other recipes, actually. The discard is just as useful as a starter, in my opinion. So all I did to make this pizza crust was get my cast iron pan screaming hot in the oven and then pour my starter right into it, right out of the refrigerator. When using a wooden spoon, or mine's actually a spurtle, I don't know if you've ever heard of those or seen that infomercial a few years ago, but I love them to spread out my sourdough starter all around the cast iron pan. So after you just paint it until it sticks on, then you go ahead and throw it back in the oven to get it kind of par baked before topping with the toppings of your choice. Now here I'm using a basil pesto that I made fresh out of my garden, but I did price it out for you as if purchasing from the store. So I made sure to add in all of those ingredients in our total $1 a plate process. I'm just painting this basil pesto all over the bottom. I'm going to throw some of that delicious rotisserie chicken in, and then I'm going to add a few other ingredients that I feel like really take this one over the top. So we're going to put some feta cheese, a few onions, and some sun-dried tomatoes on top. Now, if you're not a fan of sun-dried tomatoes or you're not a fan of any of these specific ingredients, again, totally make this yours. I have used it before with steak. I've used it with all sorts of things. And I've also just made it, of course, a traditional pizza. I will say the bottom doesn't get super crispy because you're putting a sauce on top. So make sure to kind of allow for that or keep that in mind if you're using something like a traditional pizza sauce. But this turns out just so quick and easy and really is a hit. Another way that I love to do this is to allow the kids to pick their own toppings and make their own. So I will actually make these crusts and line them up and pull them because they just pop right out of the pan. So pull them out of the pan and then line them up and let the kids put the toppings of their choice on top. But it is sometimes a little hard to tell one apart from the other. So make sure that you keep them in order so you can see exactly what's going on there. Now, if you take a look at this one, I wish I would have cooked it just a little bit longer, and you'll be able to see the side by side of the two that I'm going to show you at the end. It was a little more blonde or not quite as crispy as I would have liked it on the top. So this one, I decided to not make that mistake in quotes with, and you'll see how that turned out as well. This one is definitely more for the kids. Again, they are not quite big fans of my basil chicken pesto. So this one is going to be a barbecue chicken pizza. This one is also super easy and quick. All I did was put a quick squirt of barbecue sauce in the bottom, and then I'm going to spread it out. Take what's left of that chicken, toss it on, add a few onions, and then some cheese. With this pizza, I definitely did cook it a little bit longer, which reminds me, oh yeah, I know why I cooked this a little less time this time. That crust around the edges can go from not quite where you want it to overdone really fast because it stands up so much taller. And that pan has been in that screaming hot oven for around 30 minutes now, with the time that it took me to warm it up, make the first pizza, and get this one in. So be a little bit cautious on your overall cook time. You do want to watch it pretty carefully, especially those very top edges. As you can see, they got a little darker than I wanted, but all I decided to do was go ahead and just use my cutter here and take those crispy edges right off the top. Those went straight into the composter, and the kids didn't even know the difference. They were totally fine with it. It tasted absolutely amazing as is, and it did have a really nice texture to the bottom of the crust, held up super well. So definitely don't hesitate if something ever gets a little bit done on those top edges when you're making this pizza. Because of the way those sides stand up off the cast iron, just cut it off. It is still so delicious with or without the edges, so nothing to worry about there. This is also something that I've taken to church potlucks in the past. They go over really, really well because you can cut the slices really small, and the overall size of the pizza is pretty little because I'm using a 10-inch cast iron skillet for this. If you go a little bigger, then you can just paint the bottom, but I do find it's a little harder to get out. So just do whatever works for you. I've never actually tried it on my big griddle, but I don't know why. Maybe I should do that next time and just make a big flat. I also like to use my discard or sourdough discard for crackers, making them the exact same way. So really do strongly suggest, if you don't have a sourdough starter right now, you might want to start one easier than you think. I do have links to that, and I'll make sure to link them at the end. But this thing is so handy when you need a quick meal to just be able to throw one of those pizzas right in the oven. Now, the next meal that I'm going to make for you today is a chicken noodle soup. And I know chicken noodle soup sounds so plain and so obvious, but when you use the stock that we made in the beginning from those rotisserie chicken bones, there is just honestly absolutely nothing like it. It is so easy and simple, and these ingredients are so cheap that this comes together really fast when you're using something that you've already done. So the stock's complete, the chicken is done, and all we need to do is soften up these vegetables before adding it all together. So highly do recommend trying stock with the rotisserie chicken if you haven't done so already. Now, my air fryer that I actually have is capable of doing a rotisserie chicken, but to do it, it has to be 4 pounds or under, just so it doesn't damage the machine. If you have the ability to do a rotisserie chicken at home, don't snooze on that. Don't hesitate. But the one thing I will remind you is that it is cheaper to buy a pre-cooked, pre-packaged rotisserie chicken than it is to get a raw chicken at the store. So unless you have access to homegrown chicken, which we do for eggs, but we don't for meat at this time, then that rotisserie chicken is a really great way to go, not only as a meal prep hack step, but also for budgetary purposes as well. One other tip that I want to share on my chicken noodle soup is something that I learned back when I had a gluten-free family. We have been in all directions for diet, from vegan to carnivore, and gluten-free was definitely one of those steps along the way. And I come across some brown rice noodles from Annie Chun that are absolutely amazing and a great way to make a chicken noodle soup. We use them for our Thai chicken noodle soup, but we also use them for things like pad Thai, so I keep them around the house. But they are super easy and make a quick chicken noodle soup in no time at all. You do not want to follow the recipe directions on the back of the noodles in order to make this happen. The ideal way that I found to do it is to take the noodles, you want to crack them in the bag so they're not in that big long strip, and then throw them directly in the pan, turn off the burner, and put a lid on for exactly 4 minutes. This will not overcook your noodles. It will save you a dish when you're cleaning up because you don't have to make them in another vessel. And it also will give you the absolute perfect texture to the brown rice noodle. While I did put an entire pack in this soup, if I was making it again with this exact amount of broth that the recipe calls for, which I think is 6 cups, I probably would go about half on the actual noodle itself because the noodles tend to soak up a lot of the juice. And luckily I had some of that broth left to juice it back up for leftovers, but in the future I would go about half on the noodles themselves. Okay, so let's talk budget and how exactly I made this work. I have a family of 7, so I took the entire cost for all of the items needed to cook every single meal, down to the butter and the 1/4 cup of soy sauce, 3 eggs, 3 cups of flour. I mean, I listed it out, did the math, and came up with totals for every single ingredient. Once that was done, the total spent was $35.37 for all 5 meals plus the stock. That came out to $701 per meal, a family of 7, and I just divided it evenly. But that's not the end of the story. We had leftovers from every single meal except the pizza. That means that we were able to get multiple extra servings out of every single one of these dishes. I could have gotten at least 10 servings, but just based on the numbers of people in my family, I did the math to break it down to $1 per plate for all 5 meals. If you are interested in more ideas along the same exact line, make sure to subscribe and come back next week when I share with you all of my leftover turkey recipes that we've been trying out along the past couple weeks. I have found that the majority of recipes that call for chicken can easily be substituted with turkey, so everything I'm going to share with you again will be applicable for a rotisserie chicken if you happen to score some along the way. I also want to remind you to make sure to go over to check out the links down in the description for Vigo and take advantage of their Black Friday sales. I love my composter and those flower pots are amazing. My plants are already looking up. So I want to thank you guys for stopping by and I hope to see you back soon.